welcome to the bonsai garden. It's currently the beginning of December, and since the leaves have mostly dropped from my Japanese maples, now is a good time to review the tree structure and to make any decisions about that core structure going forward. So just before I do any work on my trees, I'd just like to show you this tree behind me. This is a Seiryu cut leaf Japanese maple, and in spring it will tend to have a sort of yellowy green leaf, and then as the year progresses it tends to have this red tinge to the edges of the leaves, and then you can see as it comes into autumn it goes into this spectacular yellowy gold colour. And just really wanted to show you this tree because it's the only Japanese maple in the garden at the moment that's still substantially in leaf. Now we are due to get some freezing temperatures this week, and I think that will just prompt these leaves to finally fall. The first tree that I'm going to take a look at here is a Katsura Japanese maple, which is a tree that I bought from B&Q, which is a big box DIY store. I bought this about 3 years ago and paid about £8 for it, so it's fairly inexpensive as trees go. For the first 2 years of its life with me, it was sat in a plastic basket to try and encourage the roots, and from that what I got was the beginnings of a nice nabari and radial root spread. Initially the tree didn't look very promising, and then I think in the second year it developed a really quite low triangular foliage look, so when it was in leaf it did really suddenly start looking quite appealing. It had this heavy awkward branch coming out to the side here. I was able to lower that slightly, and also by doing some heavy trimming at this point over here, I was able to rebalance the energy of the tree and the shape of that. Looking at it at the moment, I think this particular branch still is quite upward growing, and I would like to bring that down a bit, so I am going to apply some wire. I would prefer that it wasn't quite so straight along this section, but there isn't really a lot that I can do about that. So that might be something that I have to live with. Perhaps at some point in the future it might backbud and I might be able to do something with that. So I'm really just going to quickly go through the structure of the tree. I might apply a little bit of wire. I certainly need to do something over here, and what I might do is put some kind of pulley on there just to bring that branch into a more downward position. And also I'm just quickly going to go through the tree, and I'm looking particularly for things like branches growing upwards, anything going downwards, anything that's dead, anything that's crossing, anything that really is going to spoil the future look of the tree. It's always useful to think of your trees in terms of 3D space, so that you don't end up with something that's sort of two-dimensional and quite flat and in just one particular plane. So it's quite often useful to see your tree from above and get a different perspective. Now, in terms of the branches that I was talking about that need pruning, I have an upward growing branch in here that certainly needs to go. I'm relatively quite happy with how this looks. Perhaps need a little bit of wire on it to place some of the branches. So for example, a branch at the back here, that would look better if it moved over that way slightly. Just need to be careful because these things are quite delicate and can be damaged quite easily. Also looking at things like the length between the internodes, there are some buds at the base here, so potentially I could trim that there. Those buds there will twig out, and I'll end up with two branches coming out at that point, and I'll lose this longer length section, which is the kind of thing that we're looking for really. So I'll get to it. So the first thing that you'd be looking to do is to remove anything that's obviously dead. Next, you're looking for things that are crossing, growing upwards or growing downwards in an awkward or an unnatural position. I do have this branch in here, so that's got to go. Easy decision. I mentioned this branch here which is a bit on the long side. So I'm going to shorten this particular branch, and the intention is that the 2 buds at the base there will be activated and we'll get some ramification at that point, just cleaning up some of these little dead stubs. Now that branch that I trimmed there, I did leave a little bit of extra, because what almost certainly happens with Japanese maples is you get a little bit of dieback. So this section will die back to where those 2 buds are. If we were to cut flush with the buds, then that dieback may occur at that junction and we would effectively lose those buds. And so that whole section there could potentially die back, which is not something which we want. Just looking up here, got a bit of dieback on those, so I just trim those off. A couple of little nubs from trimming earlier in the year, I'm just going to take those off as well. I've got a branch which is growing just in here. Now that's going to become a crossing branch. It's growing back internally, so that's a bit awkward, so I'm going to remove that. I've got another long internode there which I want to take back to activate the buds, so do that there. Another branch there. And I've got a number of areas in the tree here where we've got multiple buds on one particular branch. That's not necessarily a problem, and certainly when the tree leaves out it will cover this area with foliage. However, what we won't get is the refined ramification. So let's bite the bullet and go in there and remove some of those. Remembering to leave a little bit of the branch to allow for dieback. I've got some odd crotch growth there, so a weak branch that's not really going to do much, so I'm going to remove that also. And just coming in here, I can see there is another awkward branch growing just in the junction there. I believe that needs to go as well. There we go. If I rotate the tree round, I can also see another spot just in here where we've got multiple branches emerging from the same spot. Now a lot of people worry a lot about inverse taper. It does happen naturally, so I don't necessarily think it's something to be sort of worried about as a lot of people are. Certainly Michael Hagedorn in his book Bonsai Heretic talks about that subject, and it's definitely, if you can get hold of a copy of that book, it's definitely worth having a look and seeing what he has to say on the matter. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to remove both of those at that point, and I'll leave this branch coming out to the side here for now. And I think just trim up some of the little stubby bits around there. I think at some point in the past there were more branches emerging from this point, but they've been trimmed off in previous seasons. I'm also just going around the tree and I'm looking for weak buds or shoots, such as this one, which is growing in an awkward position just above a junction, and I'm going to remove that. And there's a similar situation going on here with a number of tiny little branches coming out at that point. Do I want that? I think what I might actually do at that point is I have a larger branch coming out the top here. What I might do is I might take that off and remove one or two of these, and by removing the thicker branch what I get is that increased sense of taper in the branch. I think for the moment I may leave some of those on there and see where that develops. Just take that one off and then see where that goes in the future season. I've also got another example here where I've got quite a long internode. It has got division at the end there with branching and several buds, but I think the future structure of the tree will benefit from being trimmed back to there. Similarly, this branch here, it's got buds on the end, but that's quite a long internode, and we're trying to reduce that and to increase the ramification. So if I take that off, that will activate the 2 buds here. We get branching at that point, which we can take forward. So I just nip that off. And if you remember, at this time of year, what's happening is the energy of the tree has all been drawn back in from the leaves. It's being stored in the lower trunk and the roots. And when it comes to spring, that energy will surge back up the tree. And what we don't want to do is to be wasting that on areas of the tree that we're not going to take forward. So by pruning some of those off now, we're conserving some of that energy and making sure that that's driven to areas of the tree that we want. Now, it's good to remove there. I've got quite a long internode here. I'm not entirely happy about. I wonder if I can profitably reposition that branch. Perhaps a bit of wire to bring that round that way and bring that down. On the back of this here, I have got some little buds which I don't think will be of any use, so I'm just sort of rubbing those off. There's a little bud underneath here. Just going to take that off. And whilst we're looking at this side of the tree, we can see in here we're developing the nabari, or the tapering, flaring roots. And so there's a nice spread of roots. What I have got is I've got some moss growing up, and particularly if I turn the tree around, there's an area where the bark is separating on the back there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get a toothbrush and I'm going to clean some of that moss away to avoid that causing any further rot in the bark. Because the moss absorbs and holds moisture, what we're trying to do is just avoid that clinging to the bark and keeping the trunk too wet. So just brushing that off with a toothbrush. And we have got a root here where some of the bark has come off there. Potentially that is a root that could rot in the future, but for the time being we'll leave that and see how we get on. So we've got the worst of it there. I think it should be good going forward. So now to apply some wire. So the first thing I said was that this particular branch is a bit straight and upward growing, and what I want to do is similar to the way that this branch is more horizontal on this side, I want to lower this one down. And maples are quite brittle, so I just have to be careful about how I do that. And I'm thinking what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to attach some wire underneath that comes up this side and apply a tourniquet and just pull that down, and I can increase the tension on that over time as it moves into position. And then I'll show you a view from above as I reposition some of the wires and spread them out in a more radial pattern to get a wider, far-reaching canopy. I've got my coil of bonsai wire here. I'm not sure what gauge this is. I think perhaps it might be a 2. So I'm going to cut myself quite a generous length off that. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to feed that through wires that are underneath the pot currently holding the tree in. And then I want to bring them this side and over the branch at some point here. What I want to do is I want to avoid this wire biting in. So this is where some protection comes in handy. I have here some plastic air hose which came from my local aquatics shop at the local garden centre, and it's just a flexible, thin 4 or 5 millimetre, perhaps bigger than that, plastic hose. And what I can do is I cut a portion of that off, put that onto my wire as a protective sleeve, and this will just stop the wire from biting in and causing any issues on the trunk here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tie the wires together there. And try and put some tension into that. And there's quite a bit of tension now pulling down on there. Potentially what I could do is get a thicker length of wire, put that in there and twist that round, and I can tauten that over time. I don't think that will be necessary. I think there's sufficient tension pulling on that down now to do the job in hand. Right, so now to wire some of the branches. The first thing I want to do then is I want to separate out these branches. So I'm going to use quite a thin gauge of wire, which should be sufficient just to position that over there. So I've cut myself a short length of wire. And just position that on the branch. And I don't want to strangulate the branch. There is the danger with Japanese maples that they can scar quite easily from wire. So I'm just putting on something here that will just guide the branch rather than sort of force it into place. So quite a loose coil around the branch. And what you need to be aware of is in spring, make sure you keep an eye on this, and as soon as it looks like it's biting, then be sure to remove it. So I'll just turn this round, and you can see there where I've applied the wire, and I'm just really going to move those apart a little bit to get a better spread. Now this particular branch could be an issue in future. I'll just lower that down a little. And that potentially avoids any issue in future. I'm just looking as I turn the tree here. We've got this branch that comes along. It's got a couple of buds on there and a length of branch there with a couple of buds on the end. But I'm thinking if I just nip that at that point, those will separate out and we'll get some ramification at that point. I'm thinking this particular branch will benefit from being in a lower position. They get some wire on that, and again I think this is a 2mm gauge wire, not 100% certain, and I want to anchor that against another branch. And I'm looking around the back here. There is another branch here that perhaps might benefit as well from being in a slightly lower plane. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wire this branch and that one together. So let's start off with this one and just anchor the wire in place. And I've perhaps taken a little more wire than was necessary, but not to worry. I'm just coming around the trunk a couple of times and then up onto the branch that I initially wanted to position, and just coiling my way along the branch there. And again, it's quite a loose coil. I don't want to be strangulating the branch and giving myself problems come spring. So just trim off the excess. And then I'll manipulate those branches downwards slightly, being careful. As I say, maples are quite a brittle species and it is quite easy to get carried away and cause some damage. Okay, so that's that done. And there might be some benefit in wiring this particular branch. I'm bringing that out this way slightly. Whilst I'm at it, I think I'm going to nip that branch off there. We've got two buds at that point, so if those split into two, that gives two branches. And in fact, I'm thinking that this initially was the thick, heavy branch on the tree that I wanted to control the growth of, and this particular branch will be helping feed into that, which is why this particular branch is thicker than the others on the tree. As a means of balancing the energy, I think what I might actually do is remove all of this section here. So I'm going to take that off at that point. What you need to bear in mind, again, because of this time of year, the sap isn't flowing. There's no new vegetative growth happening in the tree, so any major cuts you need to be just careful of, because they won't heal. I'm not overly concerned about that. It's not like it's a huge cut. Perhaps if I'd been taking the branch off further down, I might have been worried and put some cut paste on that, but as it stands, I'm not concerned. I think that will be okay, and I think that's all the work that I'll be doing on that particular tree. Here it is after the work that I've done. And I've just got another branch in there that I've seen that's growing inwards, so I'll just take that off. And I think we're good at that point. So we're all set up and ready for spring. And we'll see what happens to this tree in the new growing season. This is my lovely Deshojo Japanese maple that I bought perhaps about 2 years ago from Adam at All Things Bonsai, and I believe I may have bought this at the same time that I bought the little ram's horn juniper tree. The tree has developed quite nicely in the 2 years that I've had it. The ramification has certainly increased. It's looking very much more twiggy, and I'm not proposing to do an awful lot to this apart from a little bit of trimming and also a bit of wiring just to position some of the branches in a better place. You can see from above here the branches are nicely evenly spread around the tree. There are just a couple of places where there are some longer growths and long internodes, which I'm going to just trim back slightly to improve that. It makes sense to start with and trim off those bits of growth which aren't going to be needed, and then I can just focus on the bits that are. So I'm just going to cut off some of the twigs where I'm looking to increase the ramification. So it's there, there. This growth here is quite long. There's quite a longer internode section there with a couple of buds at the base. So, but also there's another branch emerging from the same point lower down. I think what I'll actually do is remove that altogether. I'm going to apply some wire just to bring this branch round and move it away from this particular branch. Just looking underneath, there's another long internode there, so I'll take that off. There's one there. Take it off just there. And also at this point. And I've got a number of tertiary branches coming off of this particular one. It would probably be better to remove that length and have it separating at that point. And I'm also wondering whether perhaps I might actually be better removing this section here. We've got the branch, it comes up, zigzags off to that side and then zigzags off to this side, and I'm thinking that in fact if I remove that bit, I can perhaps still put a bit of wire on this just to lower it and move it slightly to the side, but if I remove that whole section there, it moves it away from this bit as well, and also get the increased taper in the branch at that point. So I think that's what I'm going to do. So bearing in mind I may get a little bit of die off, so I've left just a little bit of a stump on there which I can come back and remove in the future. Now let's just tree round. So I've got another long bit of growth here which has got buds on at various points along. In order to thicken that up, it may make sense to leave several of those buds on there. I'll just take off that end one. The thing that will happen is that you get leaves on this particular branch that will feed into it and help it to thicken up. And then perhaps next season or later in the season I can trim that back and get some ramification on there, and we'll have a thicker branch coming out at that point with several twigs coming off the side of it. So I'm just going to take that back to there. And we've got some buds growing there, so, and there. The apex of the tree here, we've got a branch which will be better positioned over that way, bring it away from this growth here. So I'll get some wire on that. and just trim off some of these unpleasant looking dead bits. Trim that to there. We've got a dead bit there. I'll just take that out. And then the branch that comes out here, it's another one with quite a long internode there. So there are buds at that point, buds at that point. If I cut that back to there, then hopefully that will develop a couple of branches from there with much shorter internodes. Right, I think it's now time to get some wire on here. So I'm going to wire to this particular branch. Bring that round. And just up here there's another slightly awkward branch which I'm going to swing around into position. So I'm just going to manipulate this branch around here slightly and also downwards. And here's the other branch that I was initially wiring. So continue to put my fairly loose coil of wire around there. Trim off some of that excess. I always tend to just loop the end of that back like that. So if I just turn the tree round, and what I'm doing is I'm wanting to position that branch over into this negative space here. And I think that's better. And I think for now that might be sufficient for the tree. We'll see how we develop in spring. Just before that goes back onto the bench, I'd just like to discuss the issue of moss on the trunk. Now this particular tree, again, like the previous one, has got an area here where we've had moss growing up it, and I think that's damaged the bark. So I'm just going to clean that off the best I can. And then I'll give it a brush with a toothbrush in just a moment. This may be a tree that come spring, I might have to consider moving it on into a flatter pot and also having a proper look at the roots, In here I've got what looks like double roots growing there, and it might be that I need to take off the top root there in favour of the root that's growing underneath. But I can have a look at that when I come to repot it. I think it's also a stage where it's perhaps worthy of a nicer pot. In addition to just brushing off the moss with a toothbrush, which is quite gentle on the tree, something that's also useful is applying vinegar. So I've got a little pot here, and because it's quite acidic, the moss really doesn't like that, so I'm just brushing that on. It won't do the tree any harm, but it will cause the moss to recede, which is what we're wanting. And there we go. I think for all intents and purposes, for the time being, quite happy with that, and that can go back on the benches. I've got quite a number of Japanese maples, and so I will continue working on those in a follow-up video which will come very shortly. So keep posted, and hope to see you in the next one.